Okay, good evening, or just about good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of Planning Committee A. I'm Councillor Johnny Crawshaw. I'm the chair of the meeting. On my right-hand side, we have Becky Eads, who is the head of planning, and to the right of her is Rachel Tyas, who is the development management officer. On my left, we've got Ange Bealby, who's from Dem Services, and to the left of her is Sandra Brannigan, who's the senior solicitor. And then down each side of the table are the committee members. So a bit of housekeeping, first of all, if I could just ask everybody to make sure that they've got their phones turned off or on silent. We're not expecting fire alarms, so if the alarms go off, we'll help everybody to leave the building by the quickest routes. If members of the public need to use the toilets, they are just over my left shoulder. And members of the committee can't leave the table during the hearing, but we will be taking adjournments if needed throughout the meeting. And people have commented that they sometimes see people on laptops during these meetings. That is because some of the members are using electronic papers rather than physical papers, and sometimes are looking things up. They're not checking Facebook or anything else untoward. So that is part of the business of this committee. If I could just briefly, for people watching, set out how the meeting will run this evening. So when we come to the main agenda item, officers will first of all talk us through the plans and give us any updates to the plans. Committee members will then be invited to ask any questions of clarification on the plans themselves. We then move to some public speakers, and we do have public speakers registered to speak this evening, so they'll be invited to address the committee and maybe ask some questions. Members will then be invited to ask officers any further questions that they have on the bulk of the report and anything that's been brought up by the public speakers. We then move into debate, and then we first test the officer recommendation on the application, and if that recommendation isn't carried, then we have a discussion about how we want to continue with the application and what we want to do with it. So hopefully that's all fairly clear, and I can move us then onto the main agenda. Just letting people know we've got a number of apologies and substitutions to the committee this evening. So just to run through them, we've had apologies from Councillor Hollier, who is substituted by Councillor Fenton, Councillor Wardby, who is substituted by Councillor Widdowson, Councillor Steels-Walshaw, who is substituted by Councillor Melly, and Councillor Kelly has sent her apologies but isn't being substituted this evening. So agenda item 1 is declarations of interest. Can I invite any members to share anything that they need to at this point in relation to interests? Not seeing anything, so it moves on to agenda item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting of the Planning Committee held on the 6th of December. Is everybody happy that they're an accurate and true record of that meeting? Seeing nods, so I will sign those in due course. Agenda item 3 is the general remit public participation. We don't have anybody registered for that section, so we can move straight on to agenda item 4, which is the plans list. We've just got the one application this evening, which is an application for the Paddock line between Park Lodge and Willow Bank, Haxby Road, York. So if I hand over to Becky to talk us through the plans.
Thank you, Chair. So it's a full planning application for erection of 117 dwellings with a pumping station, substation, together with means of vehicular access, pedestrian access and associated parking, landscaping and open space. So this is your site location plan here. See the site outlined in red. Quickly show you the photos. This is the view east down Park Lodge. This is the existing garage block at Willow Bank. The site's just here, you can see. Again, view from opposite, I can never say that, Acacia Avenue. Acacia, there you go. Yes. Yeah, I'm not Banana Man, clearly. Towards the site. And again, the view from Park Lodge looking south towards Willow Bank. And again, more photographs of the site. That's the back of the existing garage block on Willow Bank that you can see there. This being the application site, and again, the general extent there. And that's the view from the woodland to the northwest. And the view back towards Park Lodge. So this is the draft, this is the housing allocation in the draft local plan proposals, which you can see here. And this is your proposed site layout. You can see the houses arranged here with the main access road in and round, with the open space towards the rear and the existing tree bank retained. These are all in your agenda packs, but there's a variety of house types. They're all 2 stories. Just quickly flick through them. Your street elevation plans, as you can see from here. And then this is your landscape, that's the landscape master plan, as you can see. There, that's slightly scrolled in compared to what it is on your agenda pack, so that was slightly easier to see that way. That's the one on the agenda pack, and that's the details of the proposed play area. No, I don't need that one. I'll leave it on this one because I think that's probably easiest to see all the development there. I'll pass you to Rachel for the additional information update.
Thank you, Becky. It's just quite a short update, but I'd like to draw members' attention to an error at paragraph 7.2 of the report, which details the inclusion of a contribution towards improvements to sports facilities. So just to clarify, the section 106 agreement would secure £40,000 towards extending the speed zone, the 20-mile-per-hour speed zone, £6,000 towards amending the traffic regulation order to be able to introduce the expansion, and also to require that 100% of the homes would be affordable. One last update is there is some additional text added to condition 31, which relates to the travel plan, and that's to include an action plan with measures, indicative targets and costings. That's it, thank you.
Okay, so if members have any questions, just for clarity on the plans themselves, if you could just indicate now, Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask about the updates that we've just had regarding the mistake that was made on paragraph 7.2. I can see now that in the new version, there's been an omission for the £57,000 that was to be spent on the sports club. I just want to know if there's any detail around that, what the reason for the mistake was put down there. Was any funding offered and then withdrawn, or was it just something else?
That was purely my mistake, basically. It got published by accident without the recommendation. I realised that would happen, rushed it, and then put it in by accident.
Thank you.
Error, basically.
No problem. Thank you very much.
You'll probably have noticed, but there's an explanation within the report as to why we're not requiring the open space contribution.
Okay, I've got Councillor Nelson, and then I'll come to Councillor on the same point. That's fine if you'd like to come in.
Yeah, because I'd flagged this to question, because in the report it says that they opposed all of the section 106. So they opposed the 46,000 for highways as well. They opposed the education, and they opposed the sports and recreation. So that remains that the developer is against all of it, section 106, but you're still leaving highways in. Because the report says that they wanted to submit their own travel plan and didn't need to give you the 46.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. The developer was opposed to paying contribution towards the sustainable travel measures. But we as officers did not feel we could request the contribution towards open space. So that was kind of an aside, really.
So I suppose that was my question, is why do you feel confident that you can force them on the highways, but not force them on either education or open space?
I think the open space was because it was the ward is showing that there is an over provision of sports facilities, and the lack of sports provision was within the adjacent ward, which we just didn't feel we could ask for under the SILS regulation.
By the ward, the report refers to the New Earswick ward, which doesn't exist. So where is the over provision in the whole of Huntington and New Earswick, which is the ward? Or is the over provision in New Earswick, which isn't actually a ward?
I think it was as defined in the open space document that we refer to, which may have been 2000.
There's I can't recall off the top of my head exactly what it's called, but we've got through the evidence base that the Public Open Space Officer uses, which is a 2017 document, the ward boundaries are defined in that, and that's what he uses to make the assessment. And I can't tell you what they are because I can't remember what the document is off the top of my head, but that's what he's used to make his assessment of his evidence base, and then he's found through it, however this sits within that, there is sufficient provision. So that's why we've made the balance of not asking, given we have to do it on an evidence basis.
Okay, Councillor Nelson was next.
Just a couple of points for kind of pointing out, perhaps. In the highways sort of comments on page 15, they mention suggesting a shared road surface, shared surface. I've moved my pages now. I think it's on the eastern part of the site. I was wondering if we could just. Yes. It says. Officers recommend the eastern section of the main access road be changed to a shared
I think your
surface.
mic's gone off.
You might.
Councillor Nelson, if you just put your microphone back on.
It says officers recommend the eastern section of the main access road be changed to a shared surface to create a less car dominated space. I was wondering if we could just clarify which bit of the road they were recommending that for. Thank you.
I was going to shout.
It's this area here, between the Greenway and the public open space there. It's just to create more of a sense of public space without into the green area.
Great, thank you. And then the other one is, I know that within the ecology section, it said that they'd suggested retaining swampland and some of that kind of habitat work, and the developers have accepted this. I wondered if you could point out where that is on the plans. This is questions on the plans.
I seem to recall it was, I'm afraid I can't be absolutely precise. It's within the open space and it will be secured through the required conditions. I believe it's in the southwest corner, but I must admit, I'm not 100% the detail.
Is that around the pumping stations? So?
Yeah, I think in that corner. But I'm not 100% on that, so I won't want to mislead you.
Okay, any further questions on the plans? Councillor Merritt.
Yes, just a minor comment on condition 31. The reason at the end doesn't actually make sense. I think there's a word missing. On a more substantive issue, in terms of the travel planning issue and contribution, Joseph Roundtree are relying on this comment that they've got a track record. What evidence have you got that that's based on?
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Merritt, if we can hold that for after the public speakers and for officers, questions to officers on the actual, because I think we're getting into the substance of the substance of the report. I appreciate its reference in the update.
Between the two is quite difficult.
Yeah, so what we're wanting to really focus on for this section is just point to clarity on the plans that are behind us in the screen. I appreciate when we get the update, it slightly blurs that, and perhaps that's something for us to think about in terms of the scheduling of when we receive the update. Okay, any further questions on the plans? Nope. Just before we move on to public participation, I'm just going to introduce Ian Stokes, who I must apologise. I went round introducing all of the officers and not yourself, and as you stood up, I realised I'd not done that. So, Principal Development Control Engineer.
Yeah, thank you for that, and also I was 1 minute late, so
well, there you go. We'll share blame. Okay, so if I move us then onto the public participation section. So we have 4 people registered to speak, and I'm just looking for my list that has all of their names on. It's right in front of me. It's going to be one of those evenings this evening, I can tell. So our first public speaker is joining us remotely via Zoom. So I have a Martina, is it Veitch? I hope I've pronounced that correctly. And can you hear it okay?
Yes, thank you. I can hear you, and you have.
Okay, so you will have 3 minutes to address the committee, What I'll do is I will run a timer, and if it looks as though you're going to run over, I'll just give you a sort of 30-second warning. But if you'd like to start in your own time and then stay on the call at the end, because members may have some questions if they want to seek any further clarity. But on you go.
Okay, thank you. I'm supportive of social and affordable housing development in principle and in practice in appropriate locations, including in my own immediate neighbourhood. So what I'm about to say is not guided by NIMBYism. I have 3 specific concerns about this development. The proposed site is waterlogged during wet periods, and you saw that on one of the photographs. I don't mean muddy, I mean a haven for water birds and waders. The site lies near the foss. Just recently, when we had a number of storms in rapid succession, the foss very near the eastern end of the site went well over its banks. We have seen significant changes in our weather patterns and more intense rain. The water has to go somewhere. The sewer system in New Earswick is, for obvious reasons, over 100 years old. And in principle, and for these reasons, I do not think this site should be built on. If it is, there are other concerns. Transport is one of them. The proposals include the suggestion that about 50 garages along Willow Bank will be demolished. The cars stored in them will have to go somewhere. There will be 117 new units and 160 car parking spaces are planned. I applaud the attempt to curb car use, but simply removing car parking spaces is not going to achieve it without a credible transport plan that moves people long-term and sustainably onto public transport. York needs to reduce its private car use, but this isn't going to help. If there's no parking available on the site, then the overflow will have to come into surrounding roads in the village and in Hartrick Oaks, where I live. If significant numbers of cars are parked on Lucan Way in Hartrick Oaks, it will make it difficult for emergency vehicles to get round the site and to individual bungalows. So I would suggest if this does go ahead, then Lucan Way needs to have a double yellow line down one side. And finally, I have looked at the house types and plans for those, and I don't think that they are aiming high enough in terms of sustainability. I see no sign of solar panels on any of the properties shown in the plans. It seems to me that the provision of solar panels or solar tiles should be standard across all new builds. So I would ask that the committee considers all those 4 points and takes them into account in making the decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You were just shy of your 3 minutes, so very well timed speech there. Thank you. Members, do you have any questions, anything that you want to clarify? I'm not seeing any hands, so thank you very much for your contribution this evening. And if you would like to continue watching on the webcast, you can find that on YouTube.
Thank you.
Okay. The next person I have registered to speak is Councillor Orrell, who is one of the ward councillors and speaking in person. So, Councillor Orrell, you will be very familiar, I'm sure, with the 3 minutes. But if you'd like to start in your own time, and I will give you a heads up if I think you're running over.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. There seems to be an assumption that if it's in the local plan, it should be approved. That's wrong. The local plan proposals for our area, accepted by its planning inspector, have been undermined by the Secretary of State's disgraceful decision to agree to the building of 300 houses on New Lane. The extensively consulted on local plan allocated 1,074 houses for Huntington and New Earswick and took into account the infrastructure of our area. With the extra 300 houses for New Lane, this has been increased to 1,270. So not only is this development no longer needed, it would just add to the strains on our area. As the last speaker said, one of these strains is flooding. Our country has again suffered serious flooding recently, with many experts condemning the fact that houses are still built on floodplains. The old school playing field is a water retention area. The 2015 floods saw houses in our area flooded, with the Environment Agency telling us that they were unrelated to the failure of the barrier. Without this field, it's likely that this flooding would have happened again a number of times since then. I spoke to a local resident recently who said they were very close to being flooded in the recent rains. As 2023 was the hottest year since records began, the risk gets greater each year as climate change accelerates. We wouldn't consider building on flood retention areas of the Ouse, so it would be illogical to accept that developing this area is wise. The best way to protect our area from flooding is to vote against this application today. Whenever we've asked the residents of New Earswick, 80% of them have told us they are opposed to building on this land. And to our residents, and no, our residents are not NIMBYs, as the last speaker said. They've supported a number of housing developments in recent years, including the extensive new lodge complex in New Earswick. With the Vanguard development, Stadium complex, and these housing developments, our infrastructure is at breaking point, including, again, as the last speaker said, sewage control. The informative says the sewer system doesn't have the capacity to accept surface water, but then allows the usual get-out clause that this is allowed as a last resort. This last resort has led to daily sewage discharges all over the country. So if this application is allowed, it could lead to sewage in our rivers.
Just
Please
over your
reject
3
this
minutes, so if you could
application
just wrap up.
and protect the future of the village of New Earswick and beyond.
Thank you very much, Councillor Orrell. And are there any questions from members? Councillor Melly?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify what the causing of the flooding is, please, because there was actually quite a lot of water there when we did our site visits the other day. Is that flooding from the River Foss? When the Foss floods, it floods onto this site, or is it just that rain pools there due to compacted ground or something?
It doesn't flood from the Foss onto that land. It floods nearby houses and downstream. This land retains the water, which if it went into the Foss would make the flooding worse or more likely.
Oh, I see. So the water's coming from rain, for example, and sitting there instead of going into the Foss. Right. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I saw Councillor Widdowson next, and then I've seen Councillor Nelson.
Councillor Orrell, could you just expand on what the sewage issues are?
Yes, so as the speakers have said, there is an issue with sewage in our area, and the informative quite clearly says that it can't take any more water into the sewage system. So if this application goes ahead, there will be water as a last resort going into the system, which will cause problems across the area.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Nelson.
Just a question, Councillor Orrell, about your comments about percentage of affordable housing. I noticed that within the reports and your comments, it said that you and Councillor Runciman felt the percentage of affordable housing wasn't enough. I assume they've changed that since the percentage of affordable housing is now 100% on this application.
Yeah, the application was 2 years ago.
Yeah. So I was wondering what the previous percentage was when you wrote those comments, and also how the change in percentage of affordable housing whether it's had any impact on sort of your views of the development.
Obviously, affordable housing is welcome, and the shared housing as well is welcome within that. It doesn't change the fact that this land is not suitable for development. It will cause us problems now and more in the future.
Do you remember what the percentage was when you wrote those comments?
I think David might be able to tell you that when.
Just a couple of questions from me, if I can't see any other hands. Just on the point that you've just made there and the comments at the very start of your speech, you just said that this land is not suitable for housing, but it is an allocated site within the local plan that was developed under your administration. So has something changed significantly since that point?
Yeah, I think if you look at this in the round, I assume members will remember the local plan process, which started for this local plan in 2017, when the government instructed the council to provide a plan by May 2018. Not just York, several other councils as well were given the same instruction, that if they didn't do that, the government would send in civil servants to do it for us. It wasn't really an issue then because the plan was nearly ready. So by 2018, it went into the plan. But not only did we have to produce a plan, we had to produce a plan to the numbers that the government required. And because of that, considerable amounts of land around the city were put into the plan after all the brownfield sites were identified. So you'll find around the city what is currently greenbelt land, because the local plan isn't adopted yet, are designated for housing. I think additionally, since then, climate change has accelerated. So what may have been suitable a few years ago is no longer suitable because of the impact of climate change.
Wouldn't a logical extension of that be then that you don't support the current local plan? You don't think it's sound?
The local plan for Huntington and New Iswick, as I said at the beginning, has had a hole blown through it by the Secretary of State's decision to allow 300 houses on New Lane. Our infrastructure can't take all these extra houses.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Nelson, did you want to add something?
Just to clarify on that then, does that mean that you would say that the current local plan that is about to be implemented, that we shouldn't be necessarily providing the weight of the local plan to all of the sites that are allocated within the local plan? Because you don't think they're all appropriate and they were perhaps rushed into the local plan?
The report says that can't be taken, and I think the MPFF says the same. I don't think we should be doing these applications until the local plan is adopted, but that's not the advice that we're getting from officers.
But that would mean that when this local plan is adopted, this site will be in the local plan formally for housing, but you're saying that you don't think it should be, and there are sites in the local plan that aren't appropriate to be in the local plan at all?
Because Huntington and New Iswick now is oversupplied with housing, and because of the local plan, because of the 300 houses that Secretary of State approved last year.
I think that's a fair point, Councillor Eyre, and I think we will get to that. Councillor Widdowson, did you have something to add?
So just so I'm straight, just so that I understand, in the local plan, in your area, the amount of houses that your area could take was X. I can't remember the number, Councillor Earl, so it was X.
That's all right.
And a year or so ago, X had over 300 added by the Secretary of State. So it was X plus 300, and this would add another 100 and something.
117, yeah.
Right, okay, but that 300 is out, so this would have been all, the number of houses, forget the site, the number of houses would have been okay had the 300 other houses not gone in place, because there isn't the infrastructure in terms of schools, dentists, GPs, road space, etc. for the extra 300 which has been approved, and this puts even more strain on. That's what you're saying, is
yes.
Yeah. So it's the strain of the extra number of houses.
Just to clarify, this is within the X, your X. This number of houses is within.
I'm going to interrupt this discussion. This is something that we will debate. I'm sure that officers will give us some clear steer on what weight to give to what elements of whether something is or isn't in a local plan, is or isn't in Greenbelt, does or doesn't meet 5-year housing tests and all those sorts of things, because they're all things that are going to need to be considered. I think unless there's any further specific questions for Councillor Orrell, I will say thank you very much for coming this evening. If you'd like to take your place back in the gallery, and I will invite Councillor Runciman, who is also a ward councillor, to come and give 3 minutes. So again, Councillor Runciman, I'm sure you're incredibly familiar, and I don't need to tell you what the sketch is, so please start as you're ready.
Yeah, before I start, I want you to know that I can't hear anything anybody's saying except you, which of course is the most important. So if there are things that are pertinent to what I'm about to say, I wouldn't be able to change my speech accordingly. Now I'm here, of course, I am now picking up the loop, but you can't pick up the loop further back. Right, I'll start. Thank you. Members may be aware that New Earswick is a garden village founded by Joseph Rowntree in 1902 as a community of dwellings with sufficient facilities to encourage residents to live full and healthy lives. Seabohm Rowntree's report on poverty in York had shown the need for good housing in a healthy environment. The character of the village now seems to be changed forever. Residents expected New Lodge would be the last major development, but this application proposes more building and on greenbelt land, affecting local people. The original Joseph Rowntree Secondary School, established in 1942, had a playing field beside it that is now known as the Old School Field. In 2010, the school buildings were replaced with new playing fields behind, and these are located beside the Old School Field, which is now a place for walking and socializing. Some exercise their dogs there, bringing support for those who are lonely. More development would put more pressure on local services. Local surgeries are very busy. Local health services would have a greater problem for those trying to access medical help and support, which is already difficult. Pressure on water services and the sewage system is a big issue in our ward, as my colleague has said. The area has a very high water table, and the field floods regularly, retaining floodwater and averting flooding for local properties. This was the case when I was a governor of Joseph Rowntree School and the new school was being built. The building materials were being stored in a compound on the field and were usually in standing water. When building was complete, it took some time for the developers to resolve the issue. Local schools would need more places, with suitable areas to drop off and pick up children. Roads in the area are narrow, with little room available for more parking, either before and after school or at other times. There are already parking problems in the area. Suggestions for the allocation of any 106 money shows nothing to support the very popular local pool, run by volunteers for all ages and those with disabilities. This has been supported by residents and councillors and shows that swimming is an excellent form of exercise and is particularly important in an area so close to the foss. My colleague has already pointed out that our ward has already exceeded the housing numbers allocated in the local plan, with 1087 houses plus now 300 houses recently granted on appeal. Please reject the application and protect our greenbelt and the renowned and historic Rowntree village.
Thank you very much. And members, do there any questions? Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Councillor Runciman. You mentioned health services locally. Do you know if any assessment has been made of the impact of the developments in terms of demand for GP and other primary healthcare in the area?
I've heard of no such assessment being made, but I had a conversation with Professor Mike Holmes last week, it was, and he's very concerned about the expansion, not just here, but in other areas too, which he thinks will put a lot of pressure on GP services. And he's already asked me if he could come to Health and Wellbeing Board to talk to them about it. So I fear that no such assessment has been completed.
Okay, that's obviously something that we can clarify with officers. Councillor Whitcroft, you next, and then Councillor Stewart, I've seen you as well.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. I just wanted to ask, similar to the question I asked earlier of officers regarding the New Earswick Sports Club. I understand there was a sum of Section 106 money originally in, or at least was in the report that we received, £57,000. But then the decision was made that there was an over provision of sports and leisure there. I just wanted to know whether that informed your views there, and whether the decision around 106, just whether you could expand on the decision around 106 money on leisure.
The report makes it quite clear that there is an over-provision in New Earswick, but of course there's an under-provision in adjoining areas. And what is also very clear is if you go to any of those facilities, which obviously I have, you will find that the people there are not just coming from New Earswick, they're coming from all over the place. It mentions the Bowls Club. The Bowls Club is actually in Huntington, it's not in New Earswick. But just like, say, sports teams, football teams, anything like that, it's not confined. They don't have to have a New Earswick passport to take part.
Okay, and Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. We heard from Councillor Orrell that he would have been fine with the site, but obviously that the ward had seen an extra site on the Secretary of State's say so, and therefore it all changed for him. And he now had concerns about the sewage and the effect of climate change in the last 2 years. You, though, seem to have voted for this at every stage of full council, at every stage of being in the executive, and yet you seem to slate every single aspect of the application, rather with the exception of the affordable housing, which obviously has been increased in line with what you wanted. So I'm a bit confused that on the one hand, this site was absolutely fine in every vote you've had local plan wise, but now seemingly every single aspect of this application and the site is wrong.
Yeah, it's very interesting you say that. It's because you're looking at the front end of the issue and not the back end of the issue. There were endless discussions about whether this area, part of this area, the top of the bottom, the east or the west or whatever should be included. And because we knew the allocation for the ward was coming up, we felt that this was the best thing that we could do. We don't just go blindly in to say, oh yes, you can do that or you can't do that. It's not like that, Councillor Stewart, and you know that very well.
I'm not sure if it was the hearing loop playing up, but I mean, whether you got the question. Well, that obviously didn't relate to in any way the question I asked. The question was about, you know,
I thought it did.
Voting on the one hand for every aspect of this site at local plan and seemingly opposing every aspect of this application site.
I think
my final comment, can I just make one quick response? The local plan had to go through. Absolutely crucial. I think everybody sitting around this table know the local plan has to go through, and it had to go through then and it has to go through now. And despite the fact all around the city there were areas which people didn't like, whether they were in your party or the administration or the opposition, it absolutely had to go through. And I hope very soon it will do. This is part of it.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm just going to remind members, when we are looking at applications, we need to be clear that we're looking at the planning application that's before us within the planning framework that we have. And as I say, I will ask officers just to clarify for everybody the different elements in terms of the relationship to the local plan, this site, the relationship to the green belt or otherwise, all of those things which are the material considerations that we need to take as members when we make a decision on this. Thank you very much, Councillor Runciman. I'm not seeing anybody else. Oh, I do apologise. I had Councillor Eyre down. Got slightly distracted by that. Councillor Eyre.
Mine's a more straightforward question, but it might not be that easy. There's a lot of reference to New Earswick Sports Club. Now, I have played cricket at New Earswick Sports Club, but I'm not sure what else goes on. Can you fill us in possibly on what teams there are? Is there adult teams, junior teams, and what sports are actually at that site?
I'm sorry, Councillor, I didn't get the question. I got the point you were making about playing in the cricket club and junior teams, and you're quite right. I didn't get the question.
It was whether you know what clubs there actually are that use that facility, whether there is, I believe, I've seen rugby. I know New Earswick rugby team is there. I know New Earswick cricket team is there. I'm not aware of a New Earswick football team.
Tennis.
Tennis.
Yeah.
I'm not aware, are there any New Earswick junior football teams?
There is, yes. They don't actually always play there. Going to say rehearse. No, they practice in other places.
Well, that's all right, because I know, for example, Huntington
Yeah,
juniors
yeah.
have to play at Hopgrove because there isn't any junior sports pitches in the
Yes.
Huntington ward. So
Mm.
I was intrigued as to whether there was ability to use that new.
Okay. Any further, Councillor Merritt?
Yes, but can I just ask Councillor Runciman, you mentioned the issue of the health facilities and provisions for them. As I read the local plan that was passed by your administration, it is only in regard to strategic housing sites that additional health provision is required. So your local plan doesn't appear to cover this particular situation.
I think we had the answer to that from the chair. We're not actually looking at the local plan. I'm pleased to say at the moment, it's been mentioned by Councillor Stewart, but other than that, it's.
It's the local plan policies in which you get the additional contributions.
Yeah, so again, I think the point that Councillor Merritt is making is that because this isn't a strategic site, there wouldn't be a requirement for health needs to be taken from the site. Again, we'll take the clarification from officers on that specific point, and I think that the points that you've made will be noted by the committee. The committee can weigh them in the balance. So again, unless there's further questions, I will thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you, Chair.
So next up I have David Boyes-Watson, who is the applicant speaking in support. So again, Mr. Boyes-Watson, you'll have seen that you have 3 minutes. Sorry, I just have a Mr. Boyes-Watson registered to speak. No, I haven't. No, it's not open public party. It's a registration to speak. So I have Mr. Boyes-Watson registered to speak. Sorry, I'm afraid I don't know who you are, and it's a public. This isn't a public meeting where anybody can speak. It's a business meeting of the council held in public. So we have a protocol whereby people need to register to speak. So I'm not, as the chair, accepting somebody randomly coming up to the table. Sorry, could you just pop your microphone on so that people can hear the other half of the conversation?
Thank you.
What?
Sorry, Chair.
Who are you?
I'm Catherine Jukes. I'm the agent of the planning application, and I did actually email and register to speak alongside David. So we registered David to speak and also myself. We emailed Angela Belbid to make clear that we would be here. So the idea is David is speaking, but if there are any questions, then I'm here to help answer those questions. So I'm not speaking, but it's just in case there are any questions that I might help answer as the agent for the application.
Right, okay. In which case, the way that I'm going to handle this, because I can't accept a sorry, I don't mean to be rude by calling you a random person, but I can't accept random people coming to the table. If you can take your seat back in the gallery, I'll go through the procedure as we would normally do with the public speaker. If it gets to a point where there's a question from members that Mr. Boyes-Watson is not able to answer, then if you would like to ask my discretion as to whether or not I choose to invite your colleague up to the table, that's the way that we need to handle this.
That's a really good way. It's that thing. I didn't want to start shouting from the back of the room and answering questions. So, but thank you.
Yeah, but as I say, I can't have people who are not registered to speak. I need to be equitable for everybody. And it is a.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so you have 3 minutes to address the committee. I'll give you a heads up if I think you're running over that time, and then members may wish to ask you some questions.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of this application by Joseph Rowntree Housing Trust to build 117 truly affordable homes on land adjacent to Willow Bank in New Earswick. As most of you will be aware, JRHT is an institution rooted in York that has provided social housing and care on a not-for-profit basis for more than a century. We know York is in a housing crisis with a severe shortage of affordable homes impacted by rising prices and rents. The waiting list for affordable housing is long and only increasing, as not enough homes are available or being built. This situation must change, and this development offers an important opportunity to make that happen. The application site is allocated for residential development within the emerging local plan and is expected to contribute significantly to reducing the substantial shortfall of affordable homes in York. The houses will be a mixture of 1, 2 and 3 bedroom homes intended to address an identified housing need, particularly for smaller family homes. 70 will be for social rent and the remainder 47 for shared ownership. When built, the homes will contribute to delivering the council's carbon emission reduction targets, as homes will have high levels of insulation and heating and hot water will be provided via air source heat pumps. The houses have been designed to meet M42 standards for accessibility and adaptability, ensuring that residents will have level access throughout the ground floor, and houses can remain lifetime homes through their ability to be adapted in the future. Electric car chargers, bike stores, car club membership, and implementation of a travel plan will allow residents to make sustainable travel choices that won't rely upon cars. Additionally, the layout has been designed to encourage permeability through the site, whereby existing desire lines to the wider public footpath network have been incorporated and new walking and cycling routes from Joseph Rowntree Secondary School into New Earswick to be created. The existing 20-mile-an-hour zone along Haxby Road is also to be extended through contributions to highway improvements, which will improve road safety in the area. Approximately 1/3 of the site is to remain as open space, where playgrounds catering for all ages are to be provided alongside new habitats for wildlife. Landscaping and tree planting will create wildlife corridors that connect the site to the wider area. We have worked proactively and positively with the council's officers to address concerns raised throughout the planning process, with a view to realising the best opportunity to meet the evolving social and housing needs of the wider New Earswick community and deliver the council's own objectives for the site. We urge the committee to consider this application in the context of a critical shortage of affordable homes in York, particularly for families. It is imperative that we're granted planning permission today so that we can continue to provide much more affordable homes within the city. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, I think like everybody this evening, you're just under your 3 minutes there, so that's great. I'm looking around for questions and I see Councillor Eyre first, Councillor Whitcroft, then Councillor Nelson.
Thank you. Obviously, the bulk of the site is in the local plan. We've glossed over the fact that it's not entirely in the local plan. This is an allocation. The section at the bottom, which is the garage, isn't in the local plan and never was in the local plan. Who currently uses those garages? Is it nearby residents? And why did you choose to expand the site out of what was agreed with the council in terms of the local plan?
So the vast majority of those garages are not in use. Those that are in use are not used for cars, they're used for storage. So we deemed that actually the benefit brought by converting that area to housing was far more significant than the offer that the garages were providing currently.
Is the site viable without that then?
I would have to take that away. But we deem that the provision of additional affordable housing far outweighs the benefits that those garages currently provide. And as you'll have seen from the images, they're a nice or they attract antisocial behaviour. So they're not a particularly beneficial piece of infrastructure within the village.
Okay, Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bowes-Watson. We heard from previous speakers regarding concerns around flooding and the way that the field currently is when it regularly floods. We saw in the photos it was raised as concerns, and it's mentioned regularly in the report. I just want to know what your view as the developer is regarding the flooding and what your concerns are.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've worked very closely with the flood risk officer on this site, and that's perhaps one of the reasons why it's taken so long for this scheme to come before planning committee. We worked very hard on that. And what we've established throughout that process is that the site had to restrict outflow of water into the network in line with what currently is comes from the garage site. So it's around 18 litres a second. So that is what the outfall remains with this new the new development will still have the same outflow as is provided off the garage site currently. There's an extensive water attenuation to the north of the site, which you can see in the plans as well, which will hold back water in rain events. So we're confident that throughout that process, we've been able to demonstrate we're not increasing the risk of flooding in the area by bringing forward this development.
Sorry, was that 18 or 80 that you said?
It's approximate. I wouldn't want to quote specific figures, but it's in that region of 18.
18, yes. Okay, thank you. That's what I read in the report. Thank you.
I'm just going to use my discretion to jump in on this point, and then I will come to Councillor Nelson. Obviously, there's standing water on the site at the moment, and there's an attenuation tank within the plans, and I understand, the way that the water runs off the site will be regulated to be mirroring what currently happens. The concern I would have, though, is if you're building houses and then quite a number of them have got gardens, that water that's currently standing on the site at the moment, will that water then be standing in their back gardens, even if it's attenuated to run off into the foss in due course? And is there plans to manage that?
Yeah, because of the infrastructure in the site, the drainage will be improved, and that water will then flow into the attenuation tanks and then be pumped out via the pumping station. So you'll see an improvement in drainage on the site because of the infrastructure that's going in.
So just to be completely clear, your expectation would be that in 5 years' time, when this site's all been developed out, and this time of year, those back gardens won't be thoroughly waterlogged as the ground currently is. It'll be, might be wet, might be damp, but it won't be standing water in that way.
Yeah, that's my expectation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nelson, I've got you next.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to address something, the question of solar panels, which has obviously been raised by a number of residents and was something that stood out to me. I think it's brilliant that you're putting air source pumps, heat pumps in. But my understanding is that because they take electricity to run, the most sustainable way and affordable way for those to be implemented is to support them with solar panels. So I was just wondering what the kind of thinking was around that, whether that's something that might be considered, or whether that's just not in the plans at all.
Yeah, so in terms of, we have a specification that the houses we build, and we take what's called a fabric first approach, which means that the first approach when we're building the homes is that they're very well insulated, which reduces the the need to heat the properties. Now, as you'll have seen, there's been a viability assessment on this site. The addition of solar panels is a significant cost, which at the moment the scheme can't bear from a viability perspective. But predominantly what we feel is by the provision of that fabric first approach and the air source heat pumps, we're still achieving way over the 2013 plus 75% rule that the council applies.
Thank you, that's great. Do you know what level of glazing is going in the windows?
Well, it's just double glazing.
Double glazing, okay,
Yeah.
so they're not going to be triple glazed.
No.
And if you could also just mention a little bit about the EV parking as well. Sorry, it's within the same vein, solar panels, EV. How is that going to work? Is that going to be lamp posted, I read? Or?
It's to be confirmed through condition. I think we'll be in discussion with the council's highways team as to what their preferred provision is.
But it won't be per property, it will be a set number for the site.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. It's something that the highways team have to confirm to us.
We can seek clarification when we come to offices, but I think in the report it does set out some conditions around the where there's off-site provision, there is electric vehicle charging points within those, and then there's a certain amount of other provision where there's on-street parking, but we can come to offices to clarify that point. Right, I've got a few people, so I'm just going to tell you what order I've got you in, and then anybody else who wants to jump in, just indicate, and I'll add you to my list. But I saw Councillor Fenton, then Councillor Widdowson, then Councillor Fisher, then Councillor Eyre. So Councillor Fenton first.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. First, in relation to parking, I was going to ask a question around EV charging, but that's something that we could probably clarify with officers. I know that there are 6. Obviously, the parking is designed in a way so there isn't a parking space outside each property, but there are 6 in curtilage spaces. I just wondered whether they were designated for properties which might be occupied by residents with disabilities, whether that was the thinking, or was it just, well, we'll have 6 properties that will have an curtilage space? I wonder if you could explain how how that will work.
I mean, through the design process, those properties were deemed the best to have in curtilage parking. We haven't given consideration yet to whether that, might be, that I recognise that is a very good idea, and I think that's something we probably need to take away and look at internally through our allocations to those properties when we deliver them.
And just briefly on travel plan, obviously the document sets out that JRHT wants to do its own. I just wondered how successful you had been with Derwentthorpe. Do you see that as an exemplar of encouraging active travel and discouraging car ownership, and that's something you want to replicate on this development?
I mean, that is the intention, is to reduce car use, absolutely. And Derwentthorpe has been successful in that way. There are a lot of people accessing non-car travel. People still have cars though and will still drive places, but there are a lot of residents who either use the bus or who are cycling into the city via the Route 66 cycleway.
Okay, next I had Councillor Widdowson.
Just got a couple of questions. First of all, just building on what Councillor Nelson said, you said that solar panels make the scheme unaffordable, but this scheme is directed at affordability for housing and social housing, so for people who've got lower incomes. Electricity prices are going to continue to climb, so wouldn't it be sensible to put solar panels in so that the tenants that you've got can actually afford to turn the air heat source pumps on?
But in my answer to Councillor Nelson, I outlined that actually you need to use less energy because the properties are so well insulated.
I fully understand that, but they're still going to need to use it at some point. So
absolutely,
therefore, wouldn't it be sensible to future-proof it and actually give the ability? One, it's great for the environment. Two, it's great for the pocket for those tenants.
And that is a fair point, but I suppose it comes down at the end of the day to pounds and pence. And if we can't afford to deliver the scheme, there's no affordable housing there at all.
But if you don't deliver it at a price that your tenants can actually afford to use the houses, then they're going to have.
I'm going to interject just from the point of view of we've got the plans in front of us and we need to decide on the plans that are in front of us.
Second bit is you talk about the attenuation on the site and that the water will go off. There's going to be an awful lot of hard standing, so the water is going to come off a lot quicker.
It won't, because it's withheld in the attenuation.
And also, how does that affect how does it work with the sewage outlets as well? In terms of, they're saying that there'll be so much water on the site that it may affect the sewage, if I've read this correctly. Because Yorkshire Water can't give any guarantee that they won't put sewage into the water as well. It may or may not be held in the attenuation tank, may just soak straight through.
I think that's a question for Yorkshire Water. But so the site has been designed in line with, so Yorkshire Water have given us guidance, have approved the plans, they've confirmed that they're acceptable from their perspective. So I'm not sure what else we can do as an applicant. We've worked with their flood risk managers as officers. We've worked with Yorkshire Water to deliver a design that is acceptable. If Yorkshire Water then aren't willing to pay and improve their infrastructure, I'm not sure what we can do as an applicant at that point.
Okay.
I mean, I am 100% with you that sewage going into waterways is disgraceful.
And we can't get a guarantee on this site that it won't do it.
Councillor Widdowson, I think, to be fair to the applicant, our role as members is to test whether we feel that the report has covered everything, whether or not the planning authority is consulted with all of the people it should do, and they're the technical experts in that respect. So, Councillor Fisher.
Chair, on page 27 of the report, there is an observation by somebody that says this site was originally a tip.
and that methane is seen escaping. Now, I've known that site since 1979, so I first came to York because it was a site of the annual Grudge football match between Huntington School staff and Joseph Rowntree staff, which I ended up with bruised shins many times. However, if it's a tip and it hasn't been ventilated, it could go back a lot further than that. Have you checked out absolutely that observation is correct, is not correct, and that it never has been used as a tip? Because if it hasn't been ventilated, it can store methane for hundreds of years.
We've undertaken phase 1 ground investigation. Phase 2 ground investigation is ongoing currently, and that will establish whether it has or hasn't been a tip. I wasn't aware of that, but yeah, that will establish whether it is.
Okay, and Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. So the report identifies there's an infrastructure need generated by this development in the region of £800,000, which you're not contributing anything towards. Who do you think will pay to meet that infrastructure need? And what did you do to try and meet that need, including looking at the additional sites around there that weren't in the housing plan allocation to try and help generate the £800,000 need that you've created?
So, well, just to set out, we already make, so Joseph Rowntree already make significant contributions towards education in the village. So we already fund a primary school teacher. We've also supported the secondary school throughout the COVID pandemic. So we've supplied additional laptops. So, you know, we recognise that the fact, but we've all, you know, we continue to make steps to support education provision within the village. Unfortunately, that wasn't accepted in this process as a valid contribution. But again, you know, we have to go through a viability process. We have demonstrated the scheme cannot afford to make any contributions. That's the route we have to go down.
That's fair point, but how do you explain to the 12 children who are sitting on the street not being educated that there's no school place for them because it wasn't viable?
I don't think that's a fair question, Councillor Eyre, because the report sets out the balance in terms of the 106 contributions that are asked for and requested, the reasons why they have or haven't been granted. We as a committee can determine whether we think that that's reasonable or not. But as a local authority, the education department has a responsibility to find places for children in the city. So
the education department have requested £740,000, and the business case that the applicant has put forward could have found that 740,000. I'm asking why.
For us as a committee, that's the planning balance that we need to consider to determine. But my point is, I don't think it's a fair question to put to the applicant that what is he going to do about the 12 children that may or may not have a school place, because that, again, the applicant puts forward a scheme, the officers determine what they think is a reasonable 106 contribution, and we decide whether we think that that's fair and appropriate. Councillor Stewart.
It's just back to the solar panels, I'm afraid, which obviously you said was sort of make or break, couldn't be afforded. How much would they cost? I mean, roughly, because it sort of 117 houses, you're doing lots of good stuff. It just seems strange to me that would tip it over the edge, not least in a world where construction costs are rising at an incredible rate. And if the solar panels will tip you over the edge, won't the next rise in sort of raw materials tip you over the edge?
Well, so you're looking at several £1,000s per property. I mean, the other thing is solar panels are great, but to actually make a difference, you need a battery as well. And that's another significant investment in the property. And so it all adds up to a position where it becomes completely unaffordable.
Okay, Councillor Nelson.
Thank you. Going back to a question asked previously to a previous public participant, because I think this perhaps is the crux of some of these things. What was the previous percentage of affordable houses before you upped it to 100%?
So the percentage originally was 30%. It was policy compliant. Now JRHT would always provide 100% affordable. I think it was just in the wording of the application it went in as 30% affordable housing.
So it wasn't actually 30%.
It was always our intention to deliver 100% affordable housing.
Would it be true that if you drop the percentage of affordable housing, and I suppose your moral obligation and the needs of our city in that sense, then you'd be able to afford financially to provide all of these contributions. But the fact that this is 100% affordable site based on, you know, an area of need in the city that you have established as a priority, that's the reason that we're having these conversations about balance between financial viability and
Yeah,
provision of the
absolutely. And,
site.
you know, if you provided 60% private sale on this site, you would be able, I'm sure, to make contributions. But because we're delivering 100% affordable housing, we can't do that.
Thank you.
Councillor Widdowson, was that a supplementary to that?
Yeah, it's just clarification. Councillor Nelson saying that you can't put all the contributions in because it's now 100% affordable. But 2 sentences ago, you said your intention was for this always to be 100% affordable. So it was always 100% affordable.
I don't think that changes my question at all.
No, I'm just getting clarification. No, I'm not changing the question, Councillor Nelson. I'm just getting clarification. So your original application was 100% affordable. And this application is 100% affordable. That's what you said.
So the wording of the application, it's kind of a technical point, I suppose. The wording of the application was 30% affordable, but it was always our intention to deliver 100% affordable housing. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Eyre.
Yeah, it's on that point. If you delivered 104 affordable as per the local plan and used the additional 13 as private market sales, the developer gain on that would meet your contributions, wouldn't it?
I can't tell you the answer.
53,000 per property.
I can't tell you the answer to that. But the other thing is JRHT don't provide private sale. We're not willing to sell the site to a developer. It will be 100% affordable.
But if you did sell that site,
but we're not going to
with 13 houses to a private developer, that would.
I think we're going to go round in circles. The application is what the application is. There are things that the application brings up. There are mitigations that have been put in place by the officers. The job of us as a committee today is to decide whether or not we're satisfied that the mitigations and the applicant balance either in favour of refusal or approval, and that's the debate that we will have. I think there gets to a point where we're sort of vicariously having the debate that we may well come to via the applicant. So I think unless there's any further sort of specific questions or points of clarification, I will thank Mr. Boyes-Watson. Thank you. Thank you for your time this evening, and if you'd like to take your seat back in the gallery.
Thank you very much.
So what I'm going to do now is just take a very short, just 2 or 3 minute comfort break, just go to an adjournment. If I could just remind members that you must not discuss anything to do with this application, either with yourselves or with anybody present in the room. You can think about it, that's all right. But if we could just come back at, well, 2 to 3 minutes, 22 please, but definitely 1:45 by the latest. Right, welcome back, everybody, to this meeting of Planning Committee A. We are now moving on to the questions to officers. So this is a section for members to ask any questions on the report, anything that we've heard in the public participation. Just before we begin, because I think that there was a couple of things that were said during the discussion with the applicant and the public participants, in particular around the relationship between the local plan, this particular site, green belt or otherwise. So Becky, I just wonder if you could just set out the status of this site and how it relates to local plan or any other relevant policies.
No problem. Thank you, Chair. So if page 53, paragraph 6.7 onwards, gives you a very clear explanation. I'm just going to proceed it, but basically the application site is located within the green belt, and therefore we'd need very special circumstances to approve it. In addition to the harm by reason of inappropriate, we also think there would be some degree of harm to openness. There's unresolved objections in relation to the principle of development of the site, and therefore limited weight should be applied to policies H1 and SS18. However, this is the important bit, the evidence upon which the allocation relies is material and can be afforded significant weight. The council is also unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing supply. And again, in this context, it is considered significant weight should be given to the provision of new housing. And also the shortfall of affordable housing in the area, significant weight should be given to the ability to deliver 117 affordable units. Then if you go over to the next page, it says the site allocation has been based on comprehensive evidence with the allocation, and it is considered in the round that the provision of 117 new affordable houses are considered to cumulatively amount to very special circumstances that outweigh the harm to the greenbelt and any other harms that result from this development. So the case officer has made a very clear assessment in terms of all the harms and all the benefits of the scheme, made the balance and done a recommendation for approval. That help?
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to invite members to indicate if you've got questions, and I'll try and grab all of your hands in the order that I see them. I've seen Councillor Ayres first, so if you want to start, and I will be noting other people down.
I have 5 questions in total. I'm happy to take them all together or one at a bit, or just whatever you want, Chair, but I'll start with the
if you could start with a couple.
Yep.
And then I don't mind coming back to you if other members haven't asked those questions.
So the first question was on the live subject at the moment. So there's no reference to travellers' pitches on this particular site. This has been flagged by the planning inspector. Does this need to include that, or is it below a site threshold?
It's not a strategic site, so that policy is not applicable.
Okay.
In this case.
The second question then was around, again, about provision. So it's the health provision. So at this meeting on October the 5th, 2023, we had a planning application for Cotmanthorpe. Interestingly, Councillor Stewart, that was in your local plan and you also opposed that one. So it's not, there are precedents for such things. That was 75 homes and we secured £92,000 for health provision as part of the 106 agreement on 75 homes. If we could do that there, why has there been no consideration on this particular site?
Because there are viability issues with this site. Because we know very clearly there are viability issues. When the application first came in, there wasn't a requirement where we were within the local plan process, the weight that we could give. This application was submitted in 2020, was it? Yeah, so quite a while since. As it progressed, we've then got to a point where there's been a viability assessment. So we knew that it wasn't affordable. So then to consult to say to the NHS provision, well, would to ask the question for them then to be told, well, we know it's not viable anyway.
Well, we knew that about education and sport. Surely that's a material fact that we need to know what the NHS provision of this site would be, the same as we need to know the education requirement.
We have to
balance in our decision.
No, I see what you're saying, but given at the point when this application was submitted and the fact that it isn't a strategic site within the local plan, we've balanced that all up and not asked in this case, given that we know it's not viable.
But I can still take that as a material consideration, guessing that 75 generates 92. So it would probably be in the region of 160 to £170,000 requirement for primary care facilities.
If I could just kind of quote that the policy HW5 says assessment of the accessibility and capacity of existing primary and secondary care services will be required at the application stage for all residential strategic sites. And as this isn't a strategic site, it wasn't deemed necessary to require that assessment.
I'm very concerned now because if I was on the Cottonthorpe side, I'd be appealing our agreement, and that will knacker us for ever getting any primary care on any site other than the major strategic sites.
But it's a different situation, the one at Cottonthorpe, because it's not 100% affordable housing. It provides market housing.
I get that, but that
and
the officer has
but
just
it's
said
the
we
balance.
can't ask for it on non-strategic sites, and we
But
did ask for it.
we've also made a decision in the round that yes, what it says in that policy, when this application was submitted is the important part, given it was submitted in 2020, it's taken us a long time to resolve some of the issues on this site. We have to be reasonable through a process in terms of our ask. And we know, taking that all into account, that we've got to this point in time where we are now.
I think that becomes something that members may want to weigh in the balance when they're considering the overall determination. So,
well, Chair, can I just comment?
Of course you can.
I'm not sure whether it is a material consideration to take into account a lack of a healthcare contribution when there is no policy requirement for one on the site. So to mark it down because it isn't making a healthcare contribution when policy doesn't call for one, I would question whether that would be, or how much weight could be given if that is a material consideration, whether that would have much weight.
Thank you. That's a helpful interjection. Thank you very much. I'm just going to go through the list of names that I've got because there was a whole flurry went up. So this is the order I'm going to ask people to come in. And if I've missed you out, just indicate and I will add you to my list. So I had Councillor Fenton, then Councillor Melly, then Councillor Nelson, then Councillor Merritt. And then after anybody else, I'll come back to Councillor Ale for your other questions if they haven't been asked. So Councillor Fenton.
Thank you. Just in relation to the education, or what the sums that had been identified as a potential contribution towards education, which we now understand won't be provided, and the applicants explained why. However, there is an amount being provided under section 106. We had a discussion at planning last night in terms of, because of the viability of that site, only a certain proportion of the funds that would have otherwise been requested could be provided, and we were told that education had to get priority, and so education was prioritised in terms of the contribution that was made. Can you help me understand why it was considered, given that all of the education contribution couldn't be funded, why it was felt that better to get £46,000 for the transport related contributions rather than get a small sum of money towards education, or was it felt that having a £46,000 out of £750,000 wouldn't really make any material positive impact, therefore better to get £46,000 to deliver some identifiable improvements, or so I suppose, is it the case that education is ordinarily prioritised when it comes to taking advantage of whatever contributions are can legitimately be provided?
Okay, so this one is a different application because it's 100% affordable, and that's what we've got to consider. Usually we have 30% affordable, as you well know. The 46,000 for the highways is to mitigate against the impact of development and for highway safety reasons. So in the balance, we needed to ask, we felt that the request for the 46,000 and the reduction of the 20 mile an hour, which is what it will cover, was intrinsic to the acceptability of this scheme. Hence why we made that, whereas £46,000 compared to the greater ask of education wouldn't have had the same mitigation impact that the highways would. It's a balance. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Melly was next.
Thank you, Chair. While we've got this plan up, I was wondering if you could just show us the different plans for transport around the site for different vehicle modes, or modes of transport, because I think there's two vehicle accesses to the site. And I was just wondering where the pedestrian and cycle accesses are, and also where the parking is, and if you could talk to us a bit about the one of the submitted comments also commented on conflicts between the proposed new cycle lane along Haxby Road and one vehicle accesses to this site.
With me, right? It's a mobile microphone. Okay, so in terms of the major pedestrian and cycling infrastructure improvement for this site is a segregated shared use cycleway footway along the western edge, which comes up to the pedestrian crossing by Joseph Rowntree School, just slightly to the north, right the way through the Willow Close and beyond the new access into the site. Then the other provision for cycling is a permissive cycle route through here, through the avenue of trees. The proximity of the tree roots prevent this being widened to 3 meters, so that's why that's only a 2 meter strip through there.
Sorry to interrupt. So would that be paved? Because I think it's grass at the moment.
It's basically a sort of more less tarmac surface than you would otherwise expect, because it's through that avenue of trees. So it's more of a crushed aggregate surface. So it's a permissive use, but it does provide a pedestrian and cycle link through. At the very north of the site, you can just see this spur up between, it looks like a strange cartoonish face between the two trees, but that is a 3 meter wide cycle route. Again, it's a no-dig construction through the trees to avoid damage to the tree roots, but that provides an alternate link into the lane and the access into Joseph Rowntree School up there. There's also some links through here, so we're trying to make the site legible for cyclists through. So there's a widened link through here, and then there's a widened link through here to enable the cycle permeability through the site as well, in addition to the improved cycle route on the west of the site. And there's also the greenway through the middle of the site as well. So in terms of making it permeable for walking and cycling, that's what the site layout does. Vehicle parking is all on street, so there's no allocated parking apart from those 6. So it's a more efficient use of the parking arrangement on the site being on street.
Okay, because I thought there was a specific number of parking spaces quoted in the report.
Yeah, but they're all unallocated. They're not numbered to each dwelling.
So it's just based on how much space there is on the street and an estimate of how many cars would fit in that space.
Apart from those 6 that are off, in parking bays.
It looks from the plan, and perhaps I'm reading it wrong, but the parking spaces, that's what these boxes are along the edges of the road. Is that
these are the parking bays here?
Yes.
So
the bays are marked as bays, but they're not allocated to.
They're not allocated. No, they're just numbered for purposes to identify how many parking bays they are, but they are not allocated. And the applicant expressly stated they're not allocated.
And at the top right of the plan, is that pedestrian access?
That's the pedestrian access, because there's a sort of walking route, there's a public right of way heading off to the northeast, but there's a proposed walkway through the woods along the top there, but it's not for a main walking route, it's for people meandering around through the woods.
Okay. And in terms of vehicle movements, is it envisaged that one of the vehicle accesses would be like a primary access, or?
No, the applicant has assumed a 50-50 split between the 2 site accesses. So there is an access onto the modified roundabout here by Hartwig Oaks, and there's another access here, but the transport assessment assumed 50-50 split between the two.
Um,
And we had no reason to suggest otherwise.
so also part of the proposals are this new cycle path, down the west of the site along Haxby Road.
Yep.
So, could you tell us a bit about where that cycle path crosses the vehicle access?
Yes, there is
avoided by the other vehicle access being.
The intention here is to have a prioritised pedestrian and cycle crossing and mainly access there, so that will be a raised crossing, giving priority to pedestrians and cyclists. Similarly, there's a potentially raised crossing down through here, but I think that is not so necessarily the same impact at that one there, because that's the main pedestrian cycle route. That one we're looking at a prioritised crossing, but this one may not necessarily be so much because most of the movements would have been taken off from there by that time.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Nelson was next.
Thank you. I have a few questions, so if you want to stop me at any point.
Well, I will do the same as I did with Councillor Eyre. If you could ask a couple, and then I will happily come back to you, but.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Just tell me when to stop. While we're on this, I think that Councillor Fenton raised a really good point about blue badge parking or disabled parking. I'm aware that obviously there's no plan to allocate parking spaces, but I would hope that there would be a perhaps plan to potentially do this to specific parking spaces if required by disabled residents. I mean, clearly a lot of work's gone into all of these houses being level access downstairs so that they can be accessible. And the representative spoke about how adaptability for future use as needs change have been thought about in the planning of this. So I'm just wondering whether I think we need to think about disabled parking in light of that. And so I'm wondering whether that could be something that could be conditioned perhaps or requested within a travel plan. Your thoughts on it really, please?
Sorry, as far as I'm aware, there was no specific information as to whether any of the properties would be enhanced access, or if they were, which ones would be. So we've not considered any specific disabled parking bays because I've had no indication that there will be properties where there will be specific enhanced access provided.
And I can understand that to within a certain extent as well, in terms of you know, the whole point of housing being accessible is that you may have someone with a disability move into any of those houses at any time. So what I'm wondering is whether that can be taken into account somehow within, or whether we could be asking for a commitment to enable. I mean, I'm aware that on a street where I live, residents who moved in with a blue badge had an allocated parking space put on an otherwise unallocated road. Is that something?
The other difficulty is that our parking standards for residential development don't include for disabled parking provision, whereas they do for non-residential development. So if you had a non-residential use with so many parking spaces within them, you had a certain percentage of those were designated disabled parking bays. There isn't a similar thing for residential development.
So within the regulations, if I'm right, then actually, unless you have houses which are specifically accessible houses built for people with disabilities, that's not something we can really take into account. But
I believe there's no
potentially
specific requirement for us to do it, but we do take it into account if we have applications where they're considering enhanced access housing.
I'm going to interject. I think perhaps what you're getting at is, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, these roads will become adopted highway.
Yes.
And so were a disabled resident to require a space on the adopted highway, there's a process in place that would enable them to request that, and if they were eligible for that to be allocated as a disabled bay.
Stage at some time in the future, with this application.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sorry, that is exactly what I was asking.
Yeah, but it's not something to consider in this specific application.
Because this isn't people going to like if they were going to a shopping centre, you would expect a certain proportion of people coming to require blue badge space, so we can require that when it's residential.
That's
Slightly
completely
different
fine.
situation. but
There's a process
The
in
need
place. for
will,
that
the
to be
needs
put in
can be
place
met
if
because
needed.
there's a process there.
Yeah, there's a subsequent process.
In terms of, my other question is linked to moving around this.
In which case, if you could just pause that a sec, because I think Councillor Melly had a supplementary on that.
Yeah, but you said, Chair, exactly what I was going to say actually about it becoming an adopted highway and blue badge holders being able to apply for space on the highway.
Great. In which case, go with your next question and then I will come to Councillor Merritt. after that.
Brilliant. Yeah, the other thing that I wanted to ask about was when we're looking at the cycle routes through the end of those cul-de-sacs, I'm aware that the neighbourhood safety team, police team, whatever they're called exactly, raised reference to leaky cul-de-sacs, which is my new favourite phrase. What are our considerations around that? Would it be considered that actually some of those cycle accesses within cul-de-sacs might not be appropriate, or are we happy to?
The widening of the footways at the end of the cul-de-sacs were introduced through negotiation with the applicants because it improves the permeability through the site. So this is in the balance against the designing out crime versus sustainable access. So that's the route we've gone down, is to actually promote sustainable access, bearing in mind that the police designing out crime officer has a view on what he calls leaky cul-de-sacs.
Can I just add also, I think there's some boundary treatment was lowered just so to ensure surveillance of those routes through, just to try and address the secured by design officer who was satisfied really with the compromises that were secured.
Did you say was satisfied?
He was satisfied, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I've got Councillor Merritt and then I've seen Councillor Fisher as well.
Yes, Councillor Nelson's asked the question I was going to ask about disabled parking, but another issue is access to public transport. The bus stop for passengers coming from York is more or less in the bottom right-hand corner of that plan. And for people who live in the south side of the site, their obvious route back is to cross the road there, or at the more particularly actually at the Willow Road corner, where they can actually see traffic in both directions over a reasonable distance. But there is no provision there at the moment, or proposed in terms of your requirements to actually provide a proper pedestrian crossing, given that it's such a busy road.
The bus stops are to the north and to the south of the site. So the ones to the south are at Rowan Avenue.
Yes.
So they're about
I got off it yesterday.
So they're about 70 metres to the south of the site. The width of Hawthorne Terrace there is not really sufficient to put in a pedestrian refuge in the middle of the carriageway. And we are also seeking a contribution to reduce the speed limit to 20 miles an hour. So actually to reduce the speed of the traffic there, which may ease crossing of the road by the bus stops. Alternatively, there is a crossing of Willow Drive and also the the splitter island for the proposed new roundabout, just where the new site access is. So there is a modified crossing point put in the midpoint of the site, and then to the north of the site, then the bus stops are outside Joe Rowe School.
If I could come back, I mean, we know what pedestrian desire lines are, and expecting pedestrians to walk 100 metres up the road and then 100 metres back on the other side of the road isn't going to happen in practice. You will have people crossing the road at risk, and in effect you'll be adding to the safety risks in this area if you don't make provision.
Again, it's what we've considered to be meeting the 3 tests in NPPF, or being necessary to make the planning application directly proportionate to the site and reasonable in kind. And that was just too far away from that point of view.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Merritt, well, whilst you're here, I was recalled actually that I stopped you asking a question about condition 31 and the travel plan way back when we were talking about the plans list, and I don't know if that's been covered already or
No,
whether
it hasn't.
if you'd like to ask that
I'm-
question,
I'm
I did
quite
mean to
happy
come to you
ask
first
what
actually, but
what the evidence was that we've got to be able to be comfortable with your recommendation.
I think the update to members with the additional wording to paragraph 31 explains how confident we are with Joseph Rowntree travel planning, because it sets out that it should include a costed action plan as appropriate.
But, you know, I've had complaints about various developments where we've had costed plans, but nothing's actually been done to implement them.
Additionally, as the report says, we've sought the 25k support for CYC travel plan support and the additional £200 per dwelling, which the applicant has considered that is not necessary from their point of view.
okay. And Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about condition 38 on page 70. It says that EV charging strategy, charging points to be located in prompt position on the site and to be for the exclusive use of zero emission capable vehicles. Now, I presume that includes hybrids as well as full electrics. Hybrids and full electrics tend to require slightly different charging strategies, because hybrids, for example, usually only have a range of somewhere like 30 to 50 miles, and so can get by on a relatively low low current charger, whereas full electrics require much longer charges, much more intense charging. Will there be two different types? Can we be sure that the charging scheme will cover chargers that are suitable for both types of vehicles? Because clearly people may have hybrids which are very useful for short-term travel. My friends, for example, have a Cougar which has 35 miles now. They've never put anything but electric in it. Don't have to use any petrol because they never go more than about 10, 12 miles in it. But they like the option of having an engine in case they decide to go somewhere much further afield. But I think it's important to make sure that the charging strategy caters for both types of vehicle. Can I be sure that that is actually in the charging strategy?
I think we can add that as an informative. That would certainly be expecting.
Chargers must be suitable for both hybrids and full electric vehicles.
Yeah,
thank you.
Got to note of that.
Is that supplementary or no? Okay, so I have got Councillor Eyre and Councillor Nelson who both had additional questions who I'm going to come back to. I'm going to take Councillor Stewart, who I've just seen with new questions, and I will take any new questions before I come back, but I promise you I will come back to you both. Councillor Stewart.
Sorry, I feel bad leaping in after.
Trying to be equitable, Councillor Stewart. Share the love.
It was said the highways would be adopted, but for example, in the Copmanthorpe application a few months ago, they're not expected to be adopted. I was just wondering what means these would be, but others won't.
The applicant can choose to offer roads up for adoption through a Section 38 agreement. So the intention of this applicant is to offer the roads up for adoption.
So this is just educating me then basically now, but so why would the applicant not, because with the Copmanthorpe application, they said, well, you know, the council won't take it on, there's no chance, etc., etc. So what are the you know, whereas logically you'd think the applicant would want that. So what are the variables that an applicant would face? I mean, in this case,
not wanting to put myself in the mind of an applicant, but knowing that a highway is adopted would certainly make it more comfortable in the minds of prospective residents that the highways would be maintained by the local authority rather than having to pay to maintain them themselves or pay a maintenance company to do it for them.
I think if I'm correct on this as well, for a highway to be adopted by the local authority, there's a threshold, a standard that it has to be built to. And a developer may choose to not build to that same standard for a range of different reasons, and that will be factored into their costings for their development. If the highways are to be adopted, the local planning authority or the local highways authority stipulates they must be built to X, Y, and Z.
So there are conditions attached that would ensure that.
Okay, Councillor Eyre, it's back to you.
Should be relatively quick, Chair, I think. So the first one, having done some research, it's all policy based, you'd be glad to know. So I've checked the Travellers Policy H5 and it refers to 5 hectares and above. So this is 4.71 hectares. Given that the original planning, the local plan allocation is 2.74 hectares, I'm now a little bit confused that that garage is 2 hectares and the rest of the site is 2.7. Are we certain on those measurements?
Tell me that again.
So the local plan allocation,
Yep.
H46, was 2.74 hectares.
Yep.
The report suggests that all of the housing site, apart from the garage, is the one from the H46, therefore
Yep.
that's 2.7. The only bit that the report says isn't part of H46 is the garages,
Right.
but the total size has gone from 2.7 to 4.7, which means those garages at the bottom must be 2 hectares, which doesn't seem to make any sense, or some other part of the site isn't part of H46. I'm guessing it's the fields on the right weren't in the original allocation. So the
I'm
report's
going to go
wrong.
back to the allocate. There you go, as if by magic. Hang on. So there's your allocation there.
Play with mud.
Yeah, just a second. The tree belt to the rear. If I'm just trying to work it out. Sorry, let me just go to a different plan because
I mean, it's generally anecdotal as long as it definitely is 4.71, because if it tips to 5, then that policy
No.
H5 on travellers kicks in and we have to take that into consideration.
We've gone from the information that we've had submitted from the applicant. In terms of, on the application form, they have to say how big the site area is. And that's where
And we never check that. It's a bit concerning if somebody says, oh, it's 4.999999 hectares, therefore none of the policy. And we go, okay, that's fantastic, well done. So that, okay, and then my second question was again going at policy. I've looked at policy HW5 and there is no reference to strategic sites, and the NPPF makes no reference to strategic sites. It says improved, enlarged or additional primary healthcare facilities will be required to support residential developments that place additional demands on services beyond the current capacity in line with the National Planning Policy Framework. Developer contributions will be required. Nothing there says that only the 5 hectare isn't in there. That's to any development, and the NPPF is any development.
You modified it in the last set of modifications and it's removed the will and substituted may. So it's not it's a negotiable one now, and you also deleted any reference to providing support for secondary healthcare. It now only covers primary healthcare. Policy has been substantially weakened in the last set of modifications.
Which is proposed modifications, and the NPPF requires it. So in line with the NPPF.
In the first instance, we go with the local policy, but this, as I've explained, we know that this site isn't viable. So we know that. So
there is a policy, and there is NPPF policy that is a material consideration. We were told earlier there was no policy. There is a policy. It is policy HW5, and the NPPF does. So it is a material consideration.
I need to go away and think about that one before I agree with you.
I think we do need to just be clear about whether or not we're adding material weight to a policy or not. So if we could just have that before we get to a point of needing to make a determination, if we can just be clear on that, that would be helpful. I had Councillor Nelson next on my list, although I'm seeing Councillor Fenton. Oh no, Councillor Fenton has asked a question. Councillor Nelson, you may go first.
Thank you. I think it's important to just ask a question around the flooding and the sewage issues that have been raised. I think that I'm sure that you have answers for this. I'm aware that you've obviously stated a view in the report, but I would really appreciate it if you could talk in a bit more detail about how confident and happy we are that this site is viable with the water attenuation things, the tanks, and how sure we are that this isn't going to add to flooding problems. I think it's been established that this site doesn't actually flood, which I think has been a bit mixed up, but it doesn't flood. It holds water that would otherwise go in the river.
Yes, the standing water at present is because of the makeup and the subsoil conditions, which is dense clay, which is impermeable. And therefore, basically, the water is just sitting on top of the site, and there's no formal land drainage at the moment. Hence why. So I think, in crude terms, by implementing drainage infrastructure, that is why the applicant has said tonight there should be an improved situation in terms of surface water. Now, we have spent a long time on the drainage issues. We've had a multitude of revisions to the drainage scheme, to the point where the council's drainage officer, Yorkshire Water and FIDB all raised no objections to the proposed means.
Could you just clarify FIDB?
Sorry, FOSS Internal Drainage Board.
Thank you. So there's been a lot of consultation with all the bodies that
yes
would have an opinion on it or be impacted by it.
Yes, and they're all satisfied that that the proposed solution is adequate.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fenton, I've seen you next, and then Councillor Widdowson as well.
Just wondering, in terms of the there's a lot of open space so within the development, which is obviously good. Are there any measures to reduce the risk of fly parking on the green open space in terms of its design, its layout? Was that something that was part of the discussions that were had with the applicant, or is that thought not to be a significant risk?
I must admit, fly parking on open space is not something I've tended to consider in the past. The closest we get to that is people parking on verges, where the verges are wide enough. Wholesale parking on an area set aside for public open space possibly would come down to be a specific detail later on. I'm sure you could put some kind of perimeter fencing around it that may deter it. For the planning application, so it's not something I would have considered.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Widdowson.
Just following up on the flooding and the sewage. So the flooding through the tank and through all the negotiations with Yorkshire Water, the drainage boards and the applicant, she's saying that the site, even though it's now all going to hard standing, which will, it won't retain the water, but it'll bounce and move across it a lot quicker, will drain better. There doesn't seem to be, unless I've missed it, the same security about sewage not going into that water and going into the river. Am I missing something?
Can I just read out a statement the applicant provided? I just asked for additional kind of clarification how it work. In terms of foul flows out of the site and into an existing connection in the garden of 49 Hawthorne Terrace, which is owned by the applicant, by Joseph Rowntree. That's in terms of foul. In terms of surface water, all surface water eventually leaves the application site via Willow Bank. The system is designed to hold water within the pipes in preparation for its departure from the site, so the attenuation tanks work together with the thick blue drainage pipes to store water at various stages of the water flowing through the system and into Willow Bank. On the drainage drawings, S26 runs into the large attenuation tank and will only exit once the system to the south has capacity. S1 to the west on the roundabout flows eastwards and will be pushed back up into the attenuation tank if the system to the south is full. Once the water hits S24, then it's pumped to S67 until such time as it can exit into the wider system on Willow Bank. So I'm sorry if that's a little bit technical. I was just trying to get comfort that, you know, there's been sufficient detail provided.
So there is no way that sewage will go into the water that is then being released. Is that what I'm hearing? So there is you've just confirmed that we will not get sewage into, which is not what was in the report. We've just confirmed that we will not get sewage into the FOSS through the system.
I think there's a general presumption that foul and surface water
They
are
are
entirely
separate. But
So-
not when you get storm overflows, and certainly not what is happening currently around all of our rivers in the city. So that's why I keep asking the question. They keep being mixed and they keep being breached.
I don't think we can categorically say that sat here now, but what we can say is that we've consulted with Yorkshire Water and they haven't objected to the scheme, and we rely on their technical expertise as part of approvals for schemes. And given that they haven't provided us any evidence to say otherwise, and they're happy with it, we can't categorically say that because when we're not the technical experts, we rely on Yorkshire Water who haven't objected.
Yorkshire Water have not objected on the grounds that in the last case, they can release the foul water.
Say that again.
That's what's in here. They've actually said, I'm sure that they've said, because Councillor Orwell actually did it in his presentation at the start, that the backstop for Yorkshire Water is that they can release the foul, which is what they're allowed to do.
Yeah,
right.
so
away
that we
across the
can't
UK.
stop that through the planning process.
Okay.
I think that's a something that we probably all would welcome, the government tightening legislation, and in fact, unfortunately, it seems to be going in the opposite direction, doesn't it? In that respect. But you know, I think we heard the applicant say, and I think everybody around the table would say that there shouldn't be any circumstance where foul water is being discharged into rivers. Full stop.
Supplementary.
Sorry, two supplementaries. I'll go to Councillor Melly first, and then Councillor Nelson.
I was just wondering how much power we do have under conditions 34 and 36, which are about the means of drainage for foul and surface water and them being separate and the details needing to be approved by planning. Do those conditions give us those powers or not? Powers to prevent what Councillor Widdowson was referring to.
I think the answer's the same as we gave previously. I don't think we can give that authority that the foul, if it's related to the Yorkshire Water duties. So we can control the discharge rates and so on in terms of the surface water, and we can ensure they're separate systems by that condition. But beyond that,
We can ensure that there's foul water connections.
And that actually the foul and surface water are separate within the site. But if there's a point of connection that it can go to, and Yorkshire Water have approved it and of no objection, then that's as far as that condition can go.
Councillor Nelson.
I feel like it might be useful to just read this out, because when I think where you actually look at where they say the last resort, I believe that this is a sort of general statement and it is not directly related to this site. It says the public sewer network does not have a capacity to accept an unrestricted discharge of surface water. Surface water discharge to the existing public sewer network must only be as a last resort. The developer is required to eliminate other means of surface water disposal. I'm assuming that's the bit you're referring to. But the statements about the public sewer network not being able to accept unrestricted, I mean, it's kind of obviously, yes, it can't accept unrestricted discharge. That doesn't strike me as, and I'd appreciate your kind of views on this, as a specific comment on this site, other than saying that the developer is required to eliminate other means of surface water which they've put in the site, and that Yorkshire Water's consent is required for feeding into their system, which Yorkshire Water have obviously looked at this and are happy to give that. That actual statement about discharge is a general statement that I think probably applies across everywhere.
And possibly, my experience with Yorkshire Water and the developments that we've seen up and down the river and the conversations that we've had with them is that they use it, we are overwhelmed, or there's nothing we can do about it on too many occasions, where they won't do anything about it. So that's why I'm trying to get to the bottom of, has everything possibly been done to ensure that there is no sewage going across either within the houses here or into the river? We've already got issues around the city in Clifton where we've got issues with it. We've got issues up and down the river.
Until national policy and legislation changes to accommodate that, then
I think we're sort of all talking around the same point in a way. I think I'm going to summarize it like this. You get sewage discharge when you get an overwhelming amount of surface water going into the sewage, into the foul system. And so the point of the conditions is to keep the foul and surface separate, so that for this development, there won't be surface water going into the foul system. Therefore, there won't be a risk of overwhelm from this development within the network. But as Councillor Nelson's pointed out, Yorkshire Water are giving a overarching caveat saying that they do have areas where they have surface water going into the foul system, which does sometimes overwhelm them. And unfortunately, the legislation at the moment doesn't prevent them from discharging that into the rivers, which none of us want to see happen. So I think that we have reached the end of questions from members. No, we haven't quite, because Councillor Melly's got a question, and that's very welcome to.
Sorry. The first public speaker mentioned wading birds. I was just wondering if there is any evidence of wading birds currently using the site, and whether that's factored into like biodiversity net gain or the ecology conditions and that sort of thing. I think the only sort of thing I could see mentioned specifically was bats.
I'd have to remind myself of that section of the report, but there were improvements through the course of the application to provide a kind of retain a wetland area within it to attract. I think I've mentioned that in the report somewhere. But yeah, certainly we've secured improvements through the process to ensure further enhancements to biodiversity.
And Councillor Nelson, did you have a final question?
Thank you. This is it, I promise. The other thing that I just wanted to ask officers about was the section one. Obviously, we've talked about viability, but in terms of weight and balance, what are the officers' views on the balance of weight of this being 100% affordable site, with on the other side of that the costs of kind of education places and things which can't be covered by the developer? I get the impression that the affordability gives it significant weight, and it'd be really useful to know if the schools have had a chance to comment, or if the education department has. Yeah, but yes, that section 106 issue, officers' views.
Education colleagues we have discussed the issue with education colleagues, and they are aware of this balance that officers in DM have had to make.
Yeah, we've had dialogue with them throughout the process, and as I said when we came back, it's a balance so that we've made as officers. It's up to members whether or not you agree with our balance. We've got the weight that you can give to the evidence base of the local plan, as I've said, which should be given quite a lot of weight. We've also got the need for housing and a need for affordable housing against the fact that, yes, you won't have an education provision at the site and the implications of that. But in the balance, that's where we've got to.
Okay. I am going to just take a very short adjournment. So if we could just have 3 or 4 minutes, be back by 22, and then we'll be moving into debate and then determination. Thank you. Right, welcome back everybody to what I anticipate being the final instalment of this evening's Planning Committee A. Just before we move into debate, I'm just going to invite Becky just to give us some clarity around the policies HW5 and how that does or doesn't apply to this particular site.
Okay, so HW5 covers a raft of issues. So for example, it says the council will support the provision of new or enhanced primary and secondary care services. It goes on to talk about that, how that's in line with national planning policy framework, which it is. Developer contributions will be required in support of the increase in provision. But then the next paragraph, which is relevant to this, said an assessment of the accessibility and capacity of existing primary and secondary care services will be required at application state for residential strategic sites. So this application we haven't got to the point of making an assessment of the accessibility and capacity, because it's not a residential strategic site, hence why officers at this point have made an assessment and said we won't engage with them at the start of the application process. Then as we've gone on, it's then become clear that the site has viability issues. So we've then not pushed any further evidence base knowing that there is viability issues at the site. So we've taken it in the round, but if I see what you're saying, because there's a specific sentence in there that says developer contributions will be required to support the increase in provision, but that's where an assessment of the accessibility and capacity of the existing and primary secondary services will be required. So we need to know through that assessment that's required at that point. It's your interpretation of the policy and our interpretation of the policy that differs. So that's the explanation basically. It's the differing in interpretation.
That's right.
The way I read it is that because they moved the section about working with the healthcare sector to identify need, that basically on smaller sites, we should know, and those smaller sites should actually accept what we say in terms of healthcare provision. On the larger strategic sites, the onus is on the applicants to do the work and demonstrate what it is they have to do. On smaller sites, they rely on the work we do with, it's not the CCG anymore, the healthcare partnership locally, part of the ICB, and they should just accept the need. So the policy is there to say there is need. The strategic bit is whether it's our responsibility or their responsibility to demonstrate what that is.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
As I've said, through the Britain Act, it's open to interpretation. And as we've had this application for the amount of time we had, given the issues that we know we have with it, officers have made that call at that point not to progress with asking any further questions in terms of healthcare provision. You've very clearly made that tonight clear that you would want that in future applications. So we will go away and take that into consideration.
Okay, so that may or may not be a talking point when we move into debate, but the next section of this meeting, as I've explained on previous occasions, I'm not seeking a proposal for or against at the moment. What I am seeking is an exploration of the things that you are taking into consideration. You can give an indication of where you think you might be, but at an appropriate point, I will then seek to attest the officer recommendation. But at this stage, it is purely a debate, just to talk through any points that people may have. Councillor Eyre, I see you first.
I'll get out of the way quickly. I think it probably won't surprise anybody that I have some concerns with this particular planning application. I think reflecting on it, the local plan site was 2.74 hectares. This is twice the size of the one that was in the local plan. So it is a significant change, as was mentioned earlier. And on top of that change, there is also the loss of the 50 garages. It was suggested that garages aren't currently being used for cars. I have no way of testing that, but that obviously will have a material impact on the usage in the area and traffic flow. So there is significant differences from what was actually in the local plan. That said, 98% in support of what's proposed. I think this site can deliver 104 affordable homes. That's absolutely possible on this particular site. I think the attempts to extend this from 104 to 117 is what's led to the problems. I don't think I can support at the moment a planning application that does not provide the identified school places, does not provide the identified health places. And I really do think, and I'll take some responsibility with myself, but we do need to review our sports and open spaces strategy if that's 2017. Anybody who plays sports in York and has children that play sports in York know we have nowhere near the open space provision that's required. I think pretty much 50% of all junior football games get cancelled on a weekend because there just is not pitch availability anywhere. Huntington, where my children play all of their sports provided outside of Huntington because there isn't provision in Huntington. New Wierswick has no provision for youth. So I think, and that is a particularly small amount, but all of that in the round adds up to about £90,000. I did a quick calculation. If you drop the affordability to 90%, if you delivered that particular extension site at the bottom, you would require a developer gain of £50,000 on each of those properties to be able to fund all of the school places, all of the health provision, and all of the sports provision that is identified need. I think that's the worrying thing with this. This isn't speculative. This is saying there will be need for this, and it's not going to be provided. And I can't see anywhere where those needs will be provided. There is not £1 million in the council coffers to provide additional school spaces. There is not £250,000 in the ICB coffers to provide additional GP spaces. There will not be school places or GP spaces for people that buy these houses. So I think taking that in the round with the requirement for very special circumstances weighed against that one, it isn't quite there. It could so possibly be there. As I say, 104 affordable homes, and then use some of that land to provide what is required for an identified need. And it's perfectly acceptable. But as it is, with no contribution to education, health and sport and leisure, I wouldn't be able to support the application.
Okay, Councillor Nelson and then Councillor Stewart.
I mean, broadly, where Councillor Eyre is, to be honest, I think the vast majority of the application is good. I'm fine with the sort of flooding issues, because I think that is the, we've discussed the measures that have been taken, and unfortunately it is the national system that we have to do. I think they've done what they can. So broadly, so much of it I'm fine with, but what I'm not fine with, and this is where I'm just wrestling it, where I, not 100%, but I am potentially leaning one way, is the opt-out of the S106 provision and everything like that, and all the various levels. And I think it would be very difficult for other residents of the city to understand, why obviously going to be fair market, a reasonable rent and everything like that, that the properties and the shared ownership and all that sort of thing, and then that the residents are not, or the developer is not putting anything into certain key areas. And I just find it strange that when Joseph Rowntree does so much good, and is such a big landlord, that's the sort of breaking point for them on the inability to afford these things. So that's the one thing that I am thinking about as the negative, but it is significant.
Okay, Councillor Nelson.
Thank you. Firstly on Councillor Eyre's point about 2.7 hectares, I do feel like there's clearly an issue there, but the site in terms of its land on the local plan has been blocked out in all the documents and drawn exactly where the site is and blocked it out. It seems to me like it's possible perhaps that 2.7 was incorrect in the first place. I think it's quite clear, and it's not fair to suggest that Joseph Rowntree have added 2.7 hectares of additional land, which miraculously fills in exactly the same shaded area as the shaded area on the local plan. The shaded area of the local plan, which includes those trees, which aren't even really in there. So while there may be a discrepancy, I think it's absolutely not reasonable to suggest that that's because they've suddenly doubled the size of the site. Something's clearly gone wrong there. I think hopefully Becky's having a look at that. In a general sense, perhaps it doesn't surprise me that Councillor Eyre wants there to be less affordable houses and houses to be sold off at full market rate. I think there's a bigger value to sites that are 100% affordable and enormously where the land is kept for social rent use. We have a massive backlog in the council in other departments. So where there might not be any section 108 money coming into schools. I'm happy that planning have been talking to education. If you'd said you hadn't had any conversations at all with our education sort of department, that would be different. But at the end of the day, our planning officers are professionals who are doing their job based on much more sort of understanding of how this works than the individuals around this table, perhaps, myself included, absolutely. So it seems to me all the people who needed to be consulted and have had an opportunity to have a say, the schools had an opportunity to be here today to speak if they were really opposed to this. We have an enormous need for affordable houses, and for land not to just be sold out into private usage, which then is private forever. I agree with Councillor Stewart that I think the issues around flooding, and I'm quite satisfied that there's an awful lot of work that's gone into that by very capable professionals, and I'm quite satisfied with that. So I suppose at the end of the day, the balance is, you know, I think it's unreasonable to suggest that this isn't Joseph Rowntree doing public good. It's what that public good looks like. So the question is the balance of every house on this site will be affordable. And the majority of houses on this site are there for social rent, are there to support the council in its duty to house people, and to support the most vulnerable people in our city. The balance is that cash money isn't going into the system as it does with other developments, but with other developments, they are not that 100% affordable housing. They are not having that wider and longer term good for the communities that they're in. So for me, it's the balance, and if our colleagues have been talking to education and the schools and all the other departments, and everyone's had a chance to have a say, and no one's here saying this is not acceptable for our school or this is not acceptable, you know, from our department, when they've had opportunity to, then actually for me the balance is that the good and the importance and the dire need for affordable housing in this city for our, you know, key workers and our most vulnerable families and everybody else that has enormous need, and more families who are in the middle bracket but can't even afford to rent a house and are being forced to move out every 6 months because their landlords are hiking the rent. Like, this helps us with that, and that is an enormous problem in our city. So I feel like on the balance of it, come down on that being the most important thing for me.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nelson. Was that something you wanted just to come back on very quickly? That's fine.
Just very quickly, I want to come back on the fact, I don't think we should read anything into the fact the school aren't here and opposing it, because you know, it doesn't work quite like that in terms of who will get the benefit. But also, if we were to make it on that basis, then we would absolutely, without doubt, reject this, because as the report tells us, one comment received in favour. The report lists page after page after page of objection for this whole housing development. One comment was received in favour. So I'm sure those aren't representative of the actual great views out there, but I wouldn't read anything to school not being here.
Okay, thank you. Briefly, yeah.
Just to make that, the school are here. The school have said we need £740,000. The planning officers saying we don't think that's doable. It's over to you. So it's not the school saying, the school are saying refuse it. If you don't get 740,000, we need 740,000 to provide education places. It's for the planning committee and officers to say, actually, we're going to overrule education. So they are here and they are opposing in paragraph 5.78.
Fine. If I could just just to say, section 106. Oh, yeah, it's on. Section 106 money can only be spent once, and after that it's spent. You know, affordable houses that are available in the long term of our city, they don't go away.
Okay, Councillor Fisher was next.
Thank you. I'm going to do a little bit of maths now, because I like maths. If you look at the local plan allocations, in the Huntington New Earswick ward, there were two sites. The site on Monk's Cross, which was yielding 970 houses, and this one was yielding 104. So a total of 1,074. Now, if that had been the sole allocation, I think I can't see any way I would have been opposing this in any way, shape or form, because although it's a green belt site, there is a clear and overwhelming, very special circumstance. It's 100% affordable. However, things have changed. Some time ago, the Secretary of State allocated another 300 houses on a site that wasn't allocated in the local plan within the area. And that, together with the extra 13 that have suddenly magically appeared on this site, which I emphasise is not the same as the local plan allocation, has taken to 1387. So that's 313 new houses in Huntington. Now, obviously, there will be Section 106 payments from the new lane site, which the Secretary of State approved. But on that site, there were also 90 affordable houses. Now, those 90 affordable houses were not in the local plan allocation. So if you actually do the sums, we are now getting a total of 498 affordable houses across the 3 sites. Plus of the 13 would still leave us 77 up because of the new lane allocation. So my view is, if we just had a budget, and I'm sure the members are sitting opposite know, we've had a budget, we've had to make £14 million of cuts. That's putting pressure. Not having a Section 106 will put pressure on this council's finances. I do think that we need to say we need that Section 106 money. And if the price of that is 13 less affordable houses, I think Joseph Rowntree should swallow the pride and say, look, we'll dispose of those 13 houses at market rate to fulfil our obligations and take the pressure off City of York's budget. And that's where I sit at the moment. I can't support this without the Section 106. For education, I'm not worried about the open spaces, but education is critical.
Just going to make a couple of points of clarity if I can. First of all, it is just the application that's before us, so we can't make a distinction about that. There's been some reference made to the garages as being in addition to the allocated plan site. The garages could be developed completely separately at any point, should Joseph Rowntree wish to do so. It doesn't relate in the sense to the allocation within the local plan site. But as I think we'll all know, when you're bringing forward an application, if it's deemed to be all part of the same development, it has to all come forward as the same application. You can't do a sort of a little bit here, a little bit here, and a little bit there as a way of trying to parcel up land. I think the issue around education and the 106 request and the negotiation that's taken place, I've certainly sought to assure myself that officers have done everything they can within the education team and within the planning team to reach a point which everybody is in agreement on being the best way forward, even if not entirely comfortable. So I think that you are potentially at risk of making a false conflation to say that education asked for this much money from this development, and if they don't get that much money, they are therefore in objection to that development, which is what Councillor Eyre suggested. I think it is about balance, and actually that's the point of 106, is that 106 is simply a piece of legislation that enables mitigations to be made to make a planning or a development acceptable. It doesn't say it has to have this much, or it has to have that much, or it has to have this much. 106 just means, are the mitigations that mitigate against any harm or any negatives of this development sufficient to make it acceptable? That's what 106 means. So hopefully that's a bit of clarification on those. I'm seeing quite a lot of hands. I had. Sorry, I haven't invited you in yet. Just 1 second. Can I just see who's wanting to come in on this point? And I'm happy to take people in turn. So I will come in to Councillor Eyre in 1 second. I did have Councillor Melly's hand up before.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering over what time period the financial viability assessment was calculated over? Because usually when we're looking at financial viability assessments, in order for Section 106 agreements to be reduced, contributions to be reduced, it's a kind of a comparison of looking at what a reasonable price is for the land and construction costs versus how much is expected to be received in return based on market rates. Whereas this application is for a much longer term investment where there isn't a quick return that then can go towards Section 106 contributions. It's a longer term investment, and they will be receiving rental income for the lifetime of the development, and depending on what period you calculate the affordability over, presumably would make a huge difference. Like, can the period of Section 106 payments be extended so that a payment is only at a future point? Rather than at the point of first occupation, or whatever can it be in the future once the applicant has had more?
It's a really good question, but we've got to be reasonable through the process and how we can monitor that. And look at the information we've got in terms of ones, because obviously they've got to build the houses, which is the cost, isn't it? And everything else that goes with it. And then the rent would be over a significant period of time, and then you then need potentially review mechanisms and all sorts. Is that reasonable? We went to the point of probably not for this scheme in terms of the fact that it is providing affordable housing. The information we've got in terms of building them. Rachel, go on. Rachel's been more.
No, I was just going to say, I think there was such a negative figure in terms of the residual land value that whilst there may have been some questions that maybe, you know, there might have been a different methodology you could take. But I think that the gap was so wide that it would have been it wouldn't have been a pointless. It would have been a pointless exercise to kind of really tweak all of those.
So even if it was extended, the time period of, you know, cost versus income was extended by a year or 5 years, it still would have come back as saying financially.
That's how I understand it. And I spoke with the viability consultant that we consulted, and he was well aware that it's Joseph Rowntree, that it was, a housing provider, so of all the issues, and that was his professional opinion really, that the scheme could not deliver 106 contributions.
Councillor.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, Chair, in your remarks, you suggested you'd had conversations with education colleagues that differ from what's in the paper. The paper is quite clear that education's view is education's. Paragraph 5.81 says officers have balanced what education have said versus their view. There's nothing in here that says there's been any further comments on education.
You perhaps misunderstood what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I sought to make sure that officers had detailed conversations with their education colleagues, and that their education colleagues had reached a point where, if not saying wonderful, great, everybody understood the position that had been taken by this recommendation. Okay. Councillor, is that supplement? No. Councillor Fenton, and then Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Chair. Just thinking about the issues that have been discussed with regard to health and education, and it's been helpful to have a clarification from the officers as to why we are where we are, and fully understand the financial viability aspects. And I don't think it's really an issue of Joseph Roundtree's making, but there does seem to be a kind of, well, we'll hope for the best approach in terms of the clearly identified funding need for education, and well, potentially for health, although there hasn't been an assessment, but we can imagine that there is there will be a need there. It doesn't seem that we're in a great place, and I don't think that's the applicant's fault necessarily. It's something we need to think about more broadly for smaller sites such as this, which, as we know, cumulatively the impact can be significant. I was assured by what the applicant said in relation to the work that's been done on drainage, and I suppose only time will tell as to whether the attenuation tank is sufficiently large enough, given the increasingly sort of freak weather events we're having. The air source heat pumps are, hopefully sort of trend setting in terms of being a default for new developments. I don't think we should underestimate that issue. Yes, it's great if there could be solar panels as well. And maybe between now and the homes being occupied, there can be potentially an offer to new tenants in terms of some kind of longer term payment plan to support the installation of solar panels. And I hope that's something that the applicant can bear in mind. I mean, in terms of the sort of broader context of the 300 homes approved on New Lane, clearly it's an issue, and clearly it will have an impact in terms of local provision. I don't necessarily think that, certainly in my mind, it doesn't weigh particularly heavily in terms of my view on this development. But again, I do think it does highlight some of the pressures on health and education that may not be met. But this is a sustainable site. There is an identified need for affordable housing. We know we don't have a 5-year housing supply. They are all significant factors, and I suppose what I'm weighing up is do those benefits outweigh the sort of undeniable concerns that have been raised and gaps in provision that we know will exist. Yes, there've been lots of objections and you know, many, and I don't underestimate the the time that the residents have put in to highlight some of the existing issues that might be exacerbated by the new development. I suppose with developments such as these, there aren't many letters of support because nobody lives there yet, and the people who potentially would live there wouldn't necessarily think, well, I'd like to live there, therefore I'll write a letter of support. So I don't see it necessarily as a numbers game in terms of there are more objectors than there are letters of support. But the development has undeniable benefits. It's really a case of whether we think those outweigh the issues and risks that I think are accepted by everyone.
Thank you. I just had Councillor Nelson indicating, I've seen a couple of others. So Councillor Nelson, if you just want to make a brief comment, because I did give you a good long go.
Thank you. Actually, Councillor Fenton's just said some of what I was going to say. I just wanted to kind of raise the new lane development and make the point that be that this is an allocated site. This could have come forward before that, and there's nothing to say the Secretary of State wouldn't still have, made the decision on that site in the way that they did. The local plan has a lot of weight. It doesn't mean that other sites in the future won't come through that are outside of the local plan. And it doesn't mean that the Secretary of State won't step into some of those and say, yes, those ones can go ahead. So I just don't feel like that actually has a great amount of material weight on this particular site, which we're looking at right now. And that's all I was going to say.
Okay, thank you. So I saw Councillor Merritt and then Councillor Widdowson.
Yeah, thank you. As with all these applications, they are balanced judgments, and I must admit I felt very uncomfortable when I read the section on the education payments. But you can't always get all the asks that you have out of any of these applications. The committee over many years has had to make compromises on particular sites against the viability assessments, and the judgment is whether they're appropriate in the particular circumstances. We have a massive housing crisis in this city. I did a lot of work for our submissions on the local plan, and you only need to look at the difference between the 2011 census and the 2021 census to reinforce what we already know from the above average escalation in house prices, the above average escalation in rental levels, to understand we have a problem. Reality is, with the exception of the student age group, we have lost between 5 and 10% of the population under the age of 55 in that 10-year period because of the difficulties that we have in the housing market in this city, its affordability and the rest of that. That is also impacting on the children population. There was the 21 census shows a major drop in the youngest children, and that is going to feed through the education system. The process in terms of Section 106 payments is, at the end of the day, somewhat arbitrary. It is a judgment made on the evidence of the capacities in schools at a particular point in time. If you did that same thing 2 years earlier or 2 years later, you'd come up with different numbers. But that's the system that we have in terms of helping to contribute to providing extra school places and address the needs in the city. as I say, if you actually look at the demographic trends, we will probably end up with significant surplus school places in the years to come, as that drop in the family parts of the population and the children that go with it. So I think in the circumstances, this is probably the right balance. We know that the local plan goes nowhere near enough in terms of the affordable housing provision it can make. So when we have the opportunity to make significant additional affordable housing, I think that is absolutely the right thing to do. And I think the other argument that's been made about, yes, there have been additional houses in the Huntington and New Earswick area. I think at the end of the day, we have to recognise that the local plan housing provision is not just about the very local housing needs, it's also about the housing needs of the city as a whole. And, you know, we cannot, unfortunately, because some wards are fully developed, other parts of the city have, centrally valuable green belt sites. We have a limited range of places where we can actually provide. So I think we have to take the wider context into account in terms of the housing situation. So, as I say, it's not an easy judgment. There clearly are quite legitimate arguments both ways, but I think the balance for me in terms of the significant additional affordable housing in the midst of a housing crisis is the right one on this application.
Thank you. Councillor Widdowson.
I will make it quick. I agree that it's got to be a balance, and I agree with an awful lot of statements that are made around the table. I, however, have quite a number of concerns. You've got 117 homes, which will have 200 children, 50 children. I don't know. Where are they going to get educated? How are they going to get transported around the place? You know, we've done education and health to within an inch of itself. I don't see a plan for transport, and that really worries me because this is not an easy site to get to and from. I don't see from the officer's side and from the developer's side a willingness to try and get to a solution that is sustainable in the long term for all the people that are living there. So that is the conversation that is going on in my head as to where the balances are. And I think there are too many questions still that I haven't fully got the answers to.
Okay, thank you. Any more for any more? I shall just chuck in a couple of thoughts of my own. I think that you know, this is a site which has been in the local plan for development for 20 years. It was in the 2005 local plan. It's been a long identified site that is suitable as a sustainable location. I disagree that it's not well connected. It's got a bus route that goes right past it. It's a pretty good location actually in terms of being able to not have to depend on cars as far as you know, these locations go. But you know, always welcome for, you know, there to be more things in place to make it even easier not to have to depend on a vehicle. I think the school issue is you know, clearly a difficult one, because I think that not only is it about places, but it's also about the quality and capacity. It's not just capacity in the school, it's about the what the school can deliver, the fabric of buildings, all of those sorts of things which end up being benefited from 106 type arrangements. And I think that were this a site with 30% or less affordable housing and a you know, profit-making developer being out there looking to have a substantial gain from the site and then trying to argue that they didn't need to provide education provision, then you know, I think actually all of us around the table would be screaming blue murder. But that's not the situation that we're looking at here. And I think it's slightly disingenuous in my view to say that you don't take into account the fact that 100% of the housing on this site is affordable. it's social housing. It's not even discount sale. It's social housing that's being delivered 100%. And for me, that's huge. I don't think anybody's actually discussed the development itself. And actually, one of the things that I took from the site visit and also looking at the design plan is actually how well it has been designed to fit with the local area. So it's not, you know, plonking down a kind of a development in the middle of a village that looks alien. It's been thought about to see how it extends and expands that area and fits in with that area. And I think these are all things that actually we need to be really welcoming of developers in the city, because actually on a different day, I think you'd be looking at this saying this is an exemplar development in terms of what we want to see happening in the city. So from my point of view, I really have no hesitation in wanting to support this as a application, and I hope that actually we get similar types of applications to this coming forward on some of the other allocated sites as they are built out. With that said, I think it's probably appropriate to move to testing the officer recommendation. So the officer recommendation on this is for approval. If I could. Well, when we get to that point, I will. If I could first of all just invite if anybody would like to propose the officer recommendation. Blimey, that was quick. I saw Councillor Whitcroft first, and then I saw Councillor Nelson, and I did see Councillor Merritt trying to press his microphone as well. So Councillor Whitcroft.
Formally moved, Chair.
Moving a proposal, and Councillor Nelson to second.
Formally seconded.
Thank you. So I think we've had a couple of suggested amendments to conditions. If you could just summarise
So
them.
the amendment in the additional information and the condition 31, the reason has got some words missing off the end of it, so we need to rectify that. There's also condition 38 that we add a note to it that said that makes sure it's hybrid and electric vehicle suitable.
Okay, so we're happy to accept those within the proposal. Okay, so Becky, if you could just summarise what's being proposed, and then we'll go to a vote.
So it's I'll click it 2 seconds. Can't be on the hop there. So it is full planning permission for the erection of 117 dwellings, a pumping station and substation, together with means of vehicular access, pedestrian access, associated parking, landscaping and open space, and it's recommended for approval.
Okay, so if I can see all those in favour of approval, if you could show now. Okay, anybody against? And any abstentions? Okay, so that was, can I just look over your thing? What was on? It's 2 against. So it's 7 in favour, 2 against, 1 abstention. That means that that is approved. Okay. And we have no urgent business for the meeting, so it leaves me with nothing other to do than to thank everybody for your time this evening and close the meeting. So thank you.